so much for the invitation to be with you this evening. And I just want to ask you, how are you getting along with Tuesday night for church? Are you getting used to that? Because I know in 3 weeks you're going to throw yourself all off again, right? No, that's neat to kind of change it up in the summer so that other congregations can come and be part of your summer series. We're having a Wednesday night. We didn't make the change, but we've been having a Wednesday night summer series that's been really extraordinary. Some great speakers, some great topics, things that we don't often talk about. And so we've been enjoying our summer series as well. And I see you very wisely are going to end your summer series with 2 Brents. So that's very smart, very wise, and good to be here. So when Duke said that's the question, that's the topic, what does the church need? I thought to myself, how do I want to approach this? And as I thought about that question, I concluded that this is a church that has asked that question because they want to take a serious look at what preachers think is needed for a church. And maybe even the idea of things that we can work on and maybe to take that next step as a church. And so I've come up with 3 answers to this question. And they're basically 3 things that I think churches need to be aware of from my almost 35 years of preaching. Things that I've seen that either have caused problems in the church or things that should be part of the church that for one reason or another are not part of it. And I offer this to you in the most helpful way, and I hope that whatever you can take from this that you will. I want to start off very positively to say that I truly believe that when you go and visit a Church of Christ, when you find a congregation of people that are committed to get back to the New Testament and to do those things that the New Testament church did and to believe those things, that you find and you encounter some of the best people that are on the face of this earth. And the reason for that is because you all have accepted a calling by Jesus Christ, not to live by a high standard. But I always like to say, we're not called to a high standard. We're called to live by the highest standard that any man can live by. And to accept a calling to live a life that models Jesus Christ to the best of our ability, that brings up the cream of the crop when it comes to mankind. And so I think that though we're going to talk about some very serious things tonight, I think we need to understand that we have a challenge when we try to rise up and meet that level, that expectation of living. And sometimes we need to give ourselves some grace on that, and sometimes mercy and understanding, because that is not an easy standard to achieve. Though we know we have to do it, and we have to keep trying, both as Christians individually and as a church. And having said all that, we know that the church is made up of people, and that we can sometimes get into bad habits, and that we can ignore stuff that we should be doing, but for some reason, whatever that reason is, we're not doing it. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. So when I thought about what does the church need, one of the answers that first came to me is we need more sharing of faith. I've seen where churches get, for one reason or another, comfortable with not really sharing faith, not really trying to be deliberate and trying to talk to people. And yet over and over in the New Testament, we see passages like Mark chapter 4, verse 20, where Jesus in the parable of the sower says these words, "And those are the ones on whom the seed was sown on the good soil. And they hear the word, accept it, and bear fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold." Now, a lot of passages I'm going to use on this point are going to be much like this, about we are called to be good soil. What does that good soil look like? It's good soil that bears fruit. That's what we're called to do. And I love the parable of the sower, because Jesus is speaking to people that know all about what it takes to sow seed and to reap a harvest and all of that. But imagine you're in that audience and you start hearing Jesus talk about the sower goes out to sow seed. And you're listening to this, and all of a sudden Jesus says, and the sower, he throws his seed here, and he throws his seed here, and he just throws it everywhere, and some of it lands on the roadside, some on the rocky soil. And imagine you're like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. You don't sow seed that way. You're wasting your seed. Well, we have to realize Jesus is not talking about sowing literal physical seed, is he? Jesus is talking about sowing spiritual seed, spreading or sowing the gospel. And the only way you can tell if soil is good is you got to throw it. You got to share it. And as you do that, give it enough time, you'll start to see what kind of soil, what kind of heart you're dealing with. But in literal sowing, you work the soil. You make it good soil. You're not going to put your seed in anything but good soil. But it doesn't work that way in the kingdom of God. The only way you can tell what soil you're dealing with is to give the seed everywhere. And so we've been called to share, to bear fruit. We also have John 15, verse 2, where Jesus says, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. Again, that idea that as we abide in Jesus, not some Christians, but all of us as we abide in Christ, there's this expectation of bearing fruit. And he prunes us so that we'll bear more fruit. In Romans chapter 7, verse 4 and 5, as Paul is dealing with Christians that were trying to bind the law of Moses in Christianity, I want you to notice the language of death and life that he uses here. Verse 4, therefore, my brethren, you also were made to die. Die to the law through the body of Christ, so that you might be joined to another, to him who was raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit for God. For while we were here in the flesh, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law were at work in the members of our body to bear fruit for death. In the past we bore fruit, but it was to death. It was not what we were called to Jesus. And so we can look at many passages. I think about where that well-known passage in Matthew where Jesus looks at the crowd, he looks at the people, and he has compassion on them. And he says they're sheep without a shepherd. And he says, pray, for the harvest is ready, it's ripe, but the workers are few. Now I understand as we look at these passages, sharing our faith, being evangelistic, it's not the only fruit that we bear. I understand that. But it is a fruit we are to bear. And we need to share our faith with others. Now, when a church really pursues this and really tackles that, sometimes that makes people uncomfortable because when a church is doing that, you're going to be bringing people in that need the gospel. But a lot of those people that need the gospel need it because they're messed up. They've got a lot of problems. And the gospel is there to help them work through those problems. But that makes people uncomfortable. And so we don't like bringing those problems into a congregation. It makes us feel uncomfortable. And that might be one of the reasons why a lot of times we don't share our faith, or we just share it with a certain type of people. But I want you to think about Jesus. One of the criticisms of Jesus was what? He's hanging around the sinners, the tax gatherers, the harlots. It's uncomfortable. I want you to think about Paul and Corinth. And where Jesus comes to Paul, and this is like, seems so out of character for Paul. Jesus actually tells Paul, no longer be silent, for I have many people in this city. Well, that's amazing, because if you've studied 1 Corinthians, as you all have, you know that the Corinthian brethren were very fleshly, very immoral. They had a difficult time overcoming that worldliness. And you see in 1 Corinthians all these problems that they had. And yet Paul never, ever says, you're not a church. You're not my brethren. And so we have to expect that. We're going to deal with some uncomfortable situations, but we have to let the gospel do its work and encourage people that they can change. You know, a lot of times we talk about sharing our faith. We think about, okay, we're going to help other people. We're going to help them come to the Lord and understand what it means to have the salvation of Christ. And that's true. That's a big part of it. But a lot of times when we talk about sharing faith, we don't talk about what it does for us, how it helps us. So when we share our faith, one of the things that it does, it helps us to be accountable, right? It's one thing to study your Bible, and you're going to do personal study, and you're going to see what you can learn from yourself and how it can be personal growth. That's important. That's good, right? But when you start sharing it with someone else, I don't know the word, it kind of heightens the intensity. It kind of makes you like, well, I need to study a little bit deeper. And that's the second thing that I have up here. It helps us study more. Because not only do I need to understand it, but now I need to study it so that I can help someone else, my friend, my student, my coach, so that I can help them understand it. And sometimes they come up with questions, and it doesn't mean you have to know all the answers to all the questions. But they might come up with a question and like, I've never studied that. I don't know. And that's okay. And just tell them, I'm going to go find that answer. And it might be you do your own study. It might be asking someone that might have that answer, that might know a little bit more, and then coming back and sharing that. It helps us to be more accountable, to study more in depth. I often say the best Bible class teachers are the best students, because they're willing to put in the time to make sure, okay, this might come about, this question might come about, I've got to be ready for that. And sometimes that does take time and experience, but it helps us. It makes the Word of God more applicable. In my years, I've seen kind of this attitude of where, Bible classes, sermons, they're just for personal growth, right? And there's a part of that. But there's also a part like 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, where the preacher is teaching faithful people to go teach others, right? And so I've seen them like, oh, I didn't need that sermon. I don't know why you're preaching that sermon, because I don't need it. For example, a preacher might start doing a series on Calvinism. Why are you talking about Calvinism? I don't believe in Calvinism. I don't need that. But your neighbor probably does. Or your coworker believes in it or has been taught that. You see, as we share our faith, it makes it more applicable. And on the flip side of that, I've had members come up to me and say, thank you for preaching that. I was dealing with that with my neighbor. And that makes a lot of sense. And so sharing our faith not only helps the one we're trying to bring the Lord, but it also helps us. It helps us not to major in minors. What do I mean by that? Well, from my experience, there's a lot of infighting with churches and divisions and ugliness. And a lot of times that comes about because Christians aren't busy doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're kind of like David up on the rooftop. And you know, he's not where he's supposed to be. He's not doing what he's supposed to. He's supposed to be out there with his army out in the battle, but he's not for some reason. And instead he's up on the rooftop and he's just kind of bored, his mind's wandering, and then he sees Bathsheba, and you know the rest of the story, right? Well, when we're not busy teaching other people and being productive in that and thinking about that, we got more time to what? Nitpick. To take minor little things and make major issues out of them. And I've seen it time and time again. I want you to think about Acts chapter 6. Remember, there was a problem that came up in the church in Jerusalem, the very first church, where you have the Hellenistic Jews and the native Hebrews, and some of the widows are being intentionally overlooked in the benevolence that's being served to them. And remember, the apostles come and remember what they say. This is a problem. This is important. We need to fix this. But not to the point where we stop our ministry. Where we keep teaching the gospel and pray about that. There's got to be that balance. And so we're not going to stop doing that. We're going to find a way to take care of that problem, but continue this most important work of sharing our faith. So I don't want you to just think about this as, bringing someone to Christ. That's important. But I want you to think that there's a benefit to you. It's going to help you in many ways. It's going to help you in your growth. And so, what does the church need? Well, I would say one of the things that needs to be emphasized is that sharing of faith. Start off slow. Think about someone that you might want to invite. Be deliberate about it. Some of us are more comfortable doing that than others, and I will tell you, it's easy for me to stand up here, but I continue to work on this. There's part of this I'm good, and there's part of this I'm not very good at. And I got to continue to work on that part that I'm not very good at, I'm not very comfortable with. But sharing our faith. My second answer to that question is this. We need to let Jesus be in control. You might say, well, Brother Brent, what do you mean by that? Let Jesus be in control. If you would, go with me over to the epistles of John, the letters of John. We're going to look at the third letter of John. And I want to draw your attention to verse 9. We have a very interesting character that is introduced to us in verse 9. Remember, this is the Apostle John writing this letter. And he says in verse 9, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does unjustly accusing us with wicked words, and not satisfied with this. He himself does not receive the brethren either, and he forbids those who desire to do so, and he puts them out of the church. There was this character in that church, Diotrephes, and he was creating all sorts of problems. And as you look at the text and what it says about Diotrephes, one of the things I conclude is he's in control, and not the way that Jesus would want him to be in control. He's not letting Jesus be in control. And I would say what the church needs is we need to be careful of the controller. And this is a very big problem that doesn't get talked about very much from the pulpit. But controllers have destroyed themselves. They have destroyed families. They have destroyed their job. They have destroyed churches. There's something within Diotrephes that says, I am always right. I have to let what I want to be the conclusion, to be the conclusion. And so as you start to look at this, you start to see this behavior of the controller, the Diotrephes of the congregation. So what does the controller all about? Well, controlling people is what he's all about. And when he can't get his way, if he doesn't get his way, he doesn't know what to do. Or she doesn't know what to do. They don't know how to handle that situation. And it can get very, very ugly. And you can just see that this is building up, that when John arrives, it's going to be kind of an ugly situation. It's already starting to get ugly because what is Diotrephes doing? The people that want to follow what John has written, he's kicking out of the church. He's kicking them out of the church. Does it sound kind of familiar in the days of Jesus? Remember what the Pharisees were doing? That if anyone confesses Jesus, they get kicked out of the synagogue. So many Pharisees were of this controlling nature. And so, if they don't get their way, watch out. So to try to get their way, just like you see Diotrephes, they manipulate people. They use fear. They use intimidation. They'll use the Word of God to try to manipulate people to get the outcome to be their outcome. Well, that's not letting Jesus be in control. And you might say something like this, well, I have a vision for the church. I have goals. I have ideas that I think can help the church. Great. I think that's wonderful. There are sometimes Christians that have no vision for the church, no goals, no ideas. I think that's great. But how do you go about presenting those ideas? And what if an idea, the church says, I don't think that's for us. How do you handle that situation? You've got to be careful of that. I'm not saying don't have a plan, don't have leadership. I'm talking about not leadership, I'm talking about control. And I've seen this a lot in churches. When they don't get their way, they accuse people. Is that what Diotrephes was doing? Again, notice in verse 10. John says, for this reason, when I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with wicked words. Accusing the Apostle John. That takes some guts, doesn't it? So, when you have a controller in a church, there's a couple things that often happen. Number one, there might be Christians that kind of like, we don't want to have any conflict here. We don't want to fight. So they just play nice. They go along with the controller and let him do his thing. Or there's people that like, I'm not putting up with this, but I'm not going to stand it. And so he pushes them away. And little by little, you start seeing people being pushed away. When we talk about controllers, they can be preachers. I've seen where preachers preach and demand, you believe what I believe on every single doctrine. And if you don't, you eventually get pushed out. You let Jesus be in control. I remember there's one time this preacher who really believed that women should wear a head covering in worship. And so one particular Sunday, he got up and he preached. He preached very passionately about that. And then the next Sunday came about and he was appalled because the ladies showed up and they weren't wearing head coverings. And so the following Sunday, not only did he preach on it again, but he sat in the front doorway, and he was handing out head coverings to the ladies as they were coming into the building. Can you imagine that? That church had problems. And many left because of that preacher and his controlling, manipulative ways. People that, prior to that preacher coming, were brought to the Lord with much evangelism and much work and much kindness and patience, and it doesn't take much. Especially when you have the controller. Ephesians chapter 1, 22, 23. We know this passage, but it's a great reminder. And he put all things in subjection under his feet. Of course, we're talking about Jesus here. And he gave him his head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. Let's take a look at the parallel of that in Colossians 1:18. He is also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. Jesus has first place. He's the head. He has all authority in heaven and on earth, and we need to let him have that authority. And that means whatever plans we have need to be conducted within the very thing that head, that leader, Jesus prayed, and that was unity. Same-mindedness, patience, kindness, gentleness, tolerance, and understanding. I like to say a lot of times, these cannot just be words on a page. They can't just be words that we think are true but have no impact on how we live. If we truly are people that want to get back to the New Testament pattern, we've got to do that completely. Not like, okay, well, no instrumental music and the Lord's Supper on every first day of the week, but these other matters, we're not looking for the pattern. We're not taking in consideration that. We're not looking in the mirror, and we need to be careful. Ephesians 4, verse 2 and 3. With all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. That's the way of Jesus. But when you look at Diotrephes, you don't see that, do you? No, he's in control. Doesn't matter what Jesus says, doesn't matter what his apostle says, he's in control. And so a controller can be an elder, can be a preacher, can be a parent, can be a young adult, could be a man, could be a woman, could be a coach, could be a teacher. They're found all over the place. And if I could just make this one point very quickly. As parents, we need to be careful. When our children are young, yes, we need to be controlling, right? They need our guidance. They need us to lead them and show them how to do this and so forth. But as they grow older, as they get in their teen years, we have to be willing to let them exercise their free will. We got to give them the space. We got to give them that room to make those decisions, because ultimately it's going to be their free will decision to decide if I want a relationship with Jesus or not. And I've seen it so often where you have what often they call the helicopter parent, the parent that just makes Christianity so negative and so overbearing that the child, when they get older, they're like, it's just such a negative thing, they don't want anything to do with the church. We need to be careful of that. What a better time for them to practice that free will when they're under our loving, gentle guidance, to where we can teach them. I'm not expecting them to be perfect, but we can teach them when they make those errors. Controllers destroy the peace Christ offers us. It's going to be true at home. It's going to be true at the church. And here's the big thing is that they don't see it oftentimes. This is what makes it difficult. Many that are talked to about this, they're in denial. And what you often hear them say, well, I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to help. But they don't see how much harm and hurt that they've done. And usually, all the consequences, it's pushed onto someone else. That's the accusing others part of it. So, a lot of what happens is anger, uncontrolled anger, comes from the desire to be in control. And so, what do you do with the control? Well, it's hard. But you have to stand up to them. You have to stand up with love and firmness and patience. And it may get ugly. But hopefully they'll see the error of their ways. We can't let controllers take Jesus out of his position and destroy churches. And so my third answer to this question is I would say churches need more face-to-face communication. More face-to-face communication. Let's go to Matthew 18, verse 15, where Jesus is speaking. And I think that this is a teaching that even in the church age that we need to follow, we need to practice. But I think there's a principle here as well. And so in Matthew 18, verse 15, Jesus says, if your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. Now, obviously, in this context, he's talking about you have private information about a brother and that he is living in sin. And how you handle that. You go to him. You talk with him. You try patiently, lovingly, gently, trying to get him to see the error of his ways. Right? I think there's a principle here. What if you feel like your brother has sinned against you? And that's how some translations read that. Or that your brother, your friend, has hurt you. I believe this is the answer that Jesus gives as to how to handle that situation. So, when you believe someone is in the wrong, what do you do? And just want you to think about that, what you've done in the past, how you've handled that situation, just to be honest with yourself, right? Well, hopefully what you've done is you've done what Jesus talked about. I went to that person and we talked it out. Now, is that the easy thing to do? It's not, right? A lot of times the right thing is not the easy thing. And sometimes people say, well, that's what makes it the right thing. Is it the emotionally pleasing thing? No. But sometimes the right thing is not emotionally pleasing. Right? If you are a parent, you can't always do just everything that emotionally is pleasing. You won't be a good parent. Right? So hopefully you've done that. And sometimes it's hard. But sometimes I think that because of our day and age, because of our culture, that we have forgotten how to talk to people, especially when we're talking about situations like this, a disagreement. Something has happened, something has been said, and it's hard for people to be civilized and compassionate and to talk to someone. And if you're the one being talked to, sometimes it's hard to drop down that wall and to listen to what they're saying and to even consider it. How do you handle that situation? I will tell you more and more and more, I'm seeing people and Christians, instead of doing what Jesus says, they do this. They've been hurt. So we go onto social media and we just pour it all out. What this person, what these people have done to us. Why? That is so destructive. It is not the way Christians should be. Again, remind you, we're supposed to be going back to the New Testament pattern. I don't see anything that says that we share that with others, whether we're talking about social media or just talking to others about these things. No, we go to that person. But a lot of people go to social media because of a number of reasons. And I go back to the good old days. Look at that phone up there. How many remember that phone, right? Not only that, like, it sits on your table or hangs on your wall, not the push button. Remember the one where 7, 6. It takes 5 minutes to call someone, right? Yeah, you could use that phone and spread all sorts of harmful, but you couldn't get on the internet, right? You can't spread it like you can today on social media, right? What we understand is social media gives a false sense of liberty to people. How I can write what I want, any way I want, because I'm doing it home. I think all of us have seen it. Some of the stuff that is put on social media is ugly. It's not Christ-like. It's emotional. It's poison. We get this sense of liberty. Somehow we have the right, we have the freedom because we've been hurt. It gives us a false sense of courage. I think what happens a lot, let me see if this is my next point. Yeah, we need to understand it's not a medium where most people will be honest with you. And I think that's what happens. Is that we know as we go out there and we type all of this emotion, that we know that there's people out there, they don't care if they're getting both sides. They don't care if they have they're going to reply, oh, you poor thing. Oh, you're a victim. Oh, you're right. You are okay. Is that what we're about? It gives us this false sense that somehow we're justified. But what we've really done is we've maligned whoever we're talking about. And we have not understood it from their standpoint. Maybe we're misunderstanding things. Maybe our emotions are just leading us amok into false conclusions. And then once it's out there, well, you can delete it. But it's already been out there. And how many people have seen it? The social media is not a way to defend yourself or to fix wrong. It's not a way to learn the gospel by asking people, what do they think is right? That's not the final answer. And I think there are too many Christians spending too much time looking at social media and AI these days rather than spending time in the book looking for the answer. This should not be used to make you feel better and others worse. But that's the way it's often used. Jesus said, if your right eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. If your right hand causes you to pluck or cut it off, right? Well, if we as a Christian cannot use social media in a positive, loving way that it should be used, it can be a great medium. But if we can't resist the temptation to do what we just talked about, we should cut it off. And I don't know if people know this, your phone will work without Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and whatever else, TikTok. It will work. You don't need those things. There's a wonderful use of technology, but even Christians are using it in the wrong way. Just a couple passages and we'll wrap it up. Proverbs 25:9. Argue your case with your neighbor and do not reveal the secret of another. Get what that's saying? If you got something your neighbor, talk to your neighbor. But don't talk to your neighbor about someone else, about the secret of someone else, the wrongdoing or your perception of their wrongdoing. James 5:19-20. My brethren, if any among you strays from the truth and one turns him back. I want to stop right there. In these situations, we feel like someone has sinned. He sinned against us. They hurt us, right? What should be our desire? Our desire should be what? To turn this away, to turn this around, to fix the wrong. But when we go social media, that's not what we're trying to do at all. And that's not what we do. We make things worse, though we feel better. So he goes on to say, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. But what we're talking about is it will make me feel better, and I don't care about what that person is. So what does the church need? Well, there's probably lots of answers you've heard. But there's a lot of positives in church. I don't want to say that there isn't. But when we ask a question like this, let's deal with it in a real way. Some real situations. I don't know any of this applies here. Take it for what it's worth and however it can help you. But I will tell you that when you give your life to Jesus Christ and you truly follow him, not like some of the time, and some of the time will be like the world. When you have that heart that says, I want to look at that mirror, I want to look at myself, I want to grow and develop to be like, I know we're not going to be perfect, but you're going to see an individual that's going to be one of the greatest people on the face of this earth because of what I talked about in the beginning. There might be one here tonight that needs Jesus Christ in their life. There's someone that needs to come and get some help, some encouragement, some prayers. Christianity is not something that God expects us to do alone. But to do it together, we need to do it with love and unity and tolerance and understanding. And that's what this congregation provides for you. And so if we can help you tonight, make it right with Christ, to help you with Christ, won't you let that be known as together we stand and as we sing.